Okay, we're back. What's up? I was thinking about travel, basically. Yeah, I mean, kind of, I guess, leading into a conversation, I want to talk about like relativity and like the immigrant experience, and sort of, this is kind of inspired from an interview I watched with Amia Srinivasan. I don't know if I might have butchered the name, but essentially, kind of sharing that and the perspective that I share with her, also that like travel being one of the most like eye-opening experiences and most like informable like teaching kind of things that you can subject yourself to in terms of like expanding your consciousness, expanding your awareness of like self, of culture, of like how we place ourselves in the world, etc. And like have those frames to address that. And it's sort of what I had been thinking, but I think that it's interesting, right? Because when you approach it from the lens of travel, right, like that's something that is more typically ascribed with like a upper class identity, right? Like the privilege to travel is something that is, I feel like, more real, more actualized, like in our day to day life. Like they, yeah, like if you are wealthy, you were able to travel and experience more, in general. Whereas like travel is sort of restricted to at least us, right? In the U.S. or in what most of the Western world, like it's not necessarily encouraged, incentivized, especially in America, to travel outside of the country. Like it's sort of I guess you could relate that to like nationalist sentiment. I don't know if that's necessarily what connotates that, but anyways, like yeah, the accessibility of that, right? But here's what I think about that though is I don't think that it necessarily is of the same benefit in that context because precisely because travel, like it's approaching travel and approaching encountering other cultures through the lens of like capitalism and consumerism and low key like racist too. It's like it's a very extractive relationship. It's a gentrifying relationship with where it is these people are traveling, where they go. Oftentimes, it's not actually like facilitated by the interaction of the actual culture, but the commodification of that. Um, and like I think that thereby like it sort of prevents. It's almost like a like it's a self-containing cycle of like exploitation that um, the upper class and the wealthy are able to travel so much and experience tourism, right? It's a difference between tourism and traveling, essentially. And so that bringing back to like the immigrant experience. And um, I was sort of reading, okay, because this is based also like out of my experience too. I think I was reading this memoir written by, I think his name is Ishmael, but he's from um, Central Africa, based essentially in the root of a civil war, and he's kind of describing an experience with the killing of a chicken, right? Which I think is interesting in the discussion of like the material advantage that third world, and I guess I want to call it the immigrant advantage, but also the third world advantage to having lived experience like in that context, in that system. It provides a sort of advantage to like these kind of individuals. And so like thinking back to my father's experience as an immigrant, like he grew up in Central America, in El Salvador, and also witnessed it. Like he's shared with me a similar experience of witnessing for the first time like the killing of a chicken, right? And I think that this is essentially what that is a recognition of what Marx would call like commodity fetishism, right? Like that is the witnessing the material, like actual processes of what it takes to bring the labor required, to bring something like chicken, right, a product, right, which is typically marketed to us as like McNuggets or some shit, like in the day to day, and the dehumanization of that process, like every step that it took to bring that chicken onto a plate to process it, like the actual living thing, the process, and that gets really industrialized and messy, but on the most basic level, this phenomena begins in the marketplace, right? It begins in the exchange of these between villagers, like between these smaller scale markets. That material process still exists, right? You can still reference that, and so that's what that is essentially. Is like it's an actual tangible material advantage that immigrant and third world country children especially have, and being able to witness and facilitate that kind of mental process, the internalization of what that is, right? Because that is essentially how we learn, is on the basis of experience, right? On the basis of sensation, of touch, of feel, of emotion, right? And so the experience of witnessing like the death of a chicken that is being killed in front of you, right? And then plucked and boiled and all that, etc. Like that is a traumatic, or can be a traumatic emotional experience, right? Because I mean that's where we get like vegetarianism, essentially, right? The acknowledgement of the animal's suffering and like the comfortability of that. Like I think the most helpful way that I've spoken to friends who are heavily vegetarian, I agree with a lot of their like where they come from, and I think this has been the most tangible idea for me to really grasp onto, is like could you morally like imagine yourself enacting this, right? Can you empathize with the butcher? Can you empathize with the human person who is making the choice to end another thing's life, right? To kill something and then to consume it, right? For the sake of eating, for the sake of taste, for the sake of whatever external reason, or so however you divert it, right? That is the essential question that is like being posed, and that's purely like a physical sensation. But the interesting thing about this is like it's not like a majority of children in immigrant and third world who are immigrants or who come from third world countries or places that are more just anywhere that is more connected with the rural marketplace, the material rural marketplace. That could be anywhere, it could be in any country, but like the proximity to that is the emotional advantage of having had that experience, of having felt that emotion in the body, of what that means, and then making that decision. And so the interesting thing, right, is like it's not like there's it's not like vegetarianism is more common or anything within these cultures, right? But more so that like that kind of decision making process is almost like streamlined. It's internalized. It's felt within the body, far ahead of like wherein most people would express. Like I mean, that's the stereotypical like the white veganism kind of stems from this really late stage in development. Like you're choosing to do this in like your late 20s. Not that it's any less valid, but just like it appears, at least to these kinds of people, kind of obnoxious, right? Because it's like these are revelations that they experiences they have had since they were children, and like it's kind of it's a frontline advantage. What Amia is really talking about in her discussing in her podcast is the streamline of like relativism, basically, or like consciousness, right? Double consciousness, recognizing that you have been placed in another value system, in the same sense that like these kids who are able to witness the fetishization of a product like fried chicken in real time kind of occur. It's like they have an advantage, a material advantage, one that manifests itself in the body, to actually understand capitalism, understand like how it functions, understand how these things happen on a material level, and how they become dissolved into the symbolic order of consumerism, capitalism, exploitation, etc. And so in the same sense, like it's also a lens to understanding like Western world, right? Or the imperialist attitude, American capitalism specifically, like the culture that you are being indoctrinated into, right? Essentially, because what you are able to hold in full capacity is the physical manifestation of two different environments, right? The one that you bear, in image, and then the one that you also are bearing in actuality, in reality, right? And so it's like you have access in a sense to like this kind of double persona, right? It's this duality, right, which is more easily accessible to you through learning, right? Lessons that your body understands, lessons that you have felt and that you carry in your person. And so like again, it was really shit. It was also, I mean, she's a philosopher, so the focus of her advantages, right, are kind of just towards mindfulness and the ability to recognize differences in moral codes, like to the extent that morality essentially, right, and the what is right and what is wrong is ultimately a very socially loose construct. Like I think cultural relativism is one of the most underrated concepts within philosophy and within just ways of thinking in general. Like the fact that we can give validity to this, right, and that's the key thing, is that it's like you really can't like cultural relativism at the end of the day is the most indefensible position to take against like any level of like obscene, absurd differences in like personality, like to the level that all things are social and all things are constructed based on kind of arbitrary value systems. Like it's a direct pipeline to understanding that, essentially, and the understanding of that makes it therefore easier to navigate the gap between these two worlds, right? The arbitrary nature of the rules and customs that designate the moral code that you've been indoctrinated into, that is not necessarily familiar. You get to sort of, in essence, learn it for the first time, and in learning it and understanding how to navigate it, you are then better equipped to transcend it also, because now you have a dual perspective. You have lived in two worlds, essentially, and participated in two systems to the effect, right? Because it is necessary. Like you've been sort of pulled into this through the functioning of capitalism. Like it is almost necessary. The land of the material is always to our advantage. It is always to the colonized advantage, because the very condition of capitalism and exploitation demands that there be a separation, a distancing from the land, from the proximity to the material, and that is the primary condition, that is the pathology of, I mean, any kind of oppression, any kind of separation, right, is the distancing of oneself from one's environment. The the increase in proximity between the mind and the actual, like, the things that we actually experience and the things that we feel. Um, and the expression of that as such. And so, I mean, I can go all into, the indigenous ways of perceiving reality and ascribing life and consciousness to things, and where those divide, right? That there's definitely a very much westernized conception in terms, especially in like epistemology and like philosophy, and the ways that we think of the structures of reality. Like, it's all very Western dominated, and like, there's the offers like this African tribal spiritualism, as well as like, American indigenous traditions, as well as even like Pacific, I think. And this is another thing I feel, is that we really need to include our study of colonialism and the impacts of that as well on the victims of American imperialism specifically. I think that in having like a very Eurocentric perspective, or a Eurocentric centered study of colonialism, right, as it took place, through the period of the 16 to the 1800s, and then the post colonialism and the continued extraction of this, right. It's an ongoing system, but like, that we focus so much on that period specifically, I think is a retcon. I think that America does not, if if it was as widely acknowledged and studied, as American imperialism, as essentially, modern colonialism, then I think that there's so much that we can take. There's so much that we can take from the experiences of the indigenous, from the experiences of the Pacific nations, Pacific tribes. I think it's even absurd that we have like the state of Hawaii, that is a physical like statement to the period of American imperialism. We have a physical state in the Pacific that we annex, and that we control, that we operate over, and that is part of the 50 states of America. I think it is completely absurd to me. I mean, like, shout out Puerto Rico. I mean, I don't know where y'all gonna end up, but hey girl, I'm glad you made it out this far. Like, I promise you, just stick it out a couple more years. You won't even need to worry about it. Puerto Rico. We love you. So all that is to say, yeah, I mean, being an immigrant is sick as fuck. Shout out that. But if you're not an immigrant, it's totally okay. I think, again, the purpose of me getting up here and just like yapping this shit off my fucking dome for no reason, is, well, one, that I'm bored, and I'm like, I don't know, I've been needing to get this off my chest all day. I don't know why. But also that I'm about to fuck up this pizza, and fuck yeah. I don't know, but yeah, this has been Elliot. Have a good one. I gotta think of an outro or some shit. I don't know. So Stitch incoming. Obviously I recognize that it is equally absurd that the states of like California and Utah, and I mean, well, fucking Philadelphia even exist. I mean, and any of the 50 fucking states existing is a little fucking insane if you really think about it. But yeah, that, and then I wanted to add a little bit. I wanted to expand a little bit more on the concept of like cultural relativity, and why I feel like that is such an insane concept that we are even able to grasp. Because if you really follow that train of thought all the way down to the end of the line, what you're essentially arguing is individual relativity. Like, if it was, for example, like, to the extent that we can designate as cultures, right, different cultures, different societies, that, like, take for instance, like the last single tribe, right, like what is that, the last surviving man of an extinct tribe who like has existed in true solitude for the last 500 years undisturbed in like the Amazon or some shit. And like that for example is like, that is a culture. That is a manifestation of an entire culture within a single individual. And so like, if we can, given that therefore, like, individual, like there is no really a quantitative necessity, right, or boundary between like what we can define as cultural and what we can define as like culturally relative. It really is the groundworks for understanding like total individual relativity. And I think when we get to like I guess spiritualist concepts, right, and this is I wanted to touch on this too in terms of like there are equally as many lessons. I think, again, back to the point about Hawaii and California, and like within the states, and like indigenous American tribes, they themselves have some of the best accessing to um, the ways to conceptualize this, and lessons that they have experienced, which I want to talk about in another video, about like the way specifically that American imperialism kind of informs almost all contemporary genocide, right, that we can see, going ongoing in other regions of the world. But like, yeah, just the idea that individual relativity is something that we could actually really understand and integrate into like philosophy and like higher thinking, that I think should be the ultimate goal of like our the sharing of this relative, because like the awareness of cultural relativity and what it implies, because like the accessing that through accessing of like individuality, and like especially like when it comes to spiritualist concepts, and like the demystification of organized religion, where ultimately like the root of that all leads back to like the self curation of spirituality, of purpose, of meaning, of all of that. Like, I think that we need to follow that train of thought a little bit more. So I'll leave it at that, because I'll probably yap on again, and this is already 3 minutes, and my computer's about to die. But thanks for sticking around, and hope to see you again soon. Bye.